Hello students, welcome to the session on the course Postcolonial Literatures with the course code BEGC 114. Today we are going to discuss one of the units that are prescribed for you in this particular course, and from that particular unit we'll discuss one short story, Bessie Heads, the Collector of Treasures, as the title already says. But before we dive into the story and the reading of the text, we need to understand why we have at least these three authors prescribed in the short story section of this particular course. As it has already been established that as a part of our reading practice, and the reading practice that begins as a homework of sorts in the process of decolonization, we read more authors who are from the cultures that have been colonized, that have been indigenous and, have been there for a long time and been writing stories from those places, of those places, about those people. And one of the ideas or the premise on which postcolonial literatures also function is that it somehow fractures the narrative that the colonizer presents about the colonized, the picture of the colonized nations, of the people who have been there. Either they are produced by the colonizers or the Western authors or the critics, the picture that is there, the representation that is there. When the people from those nations, when they start writing about themselves, for themselves, writing back, as we have, mentioned it often, then they try to fracture that narrative, and that is one of the premises on why we read, anything that belongs to this larger rubric of postcolonial literatures. And that has rightly been done so in case of Africa, because this particular unit focuses on at least these three authors who are belonging to this particular region. So we have seen, authors like Chinua Achebe, Soyinka, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, all of them have fractured this purported image of the dark continent of Africa, and we have, through their writings, seen the images of Africa as we wouldn't have in the writings of the colonizer or the Eurocentric, perspective that kind of comes across in many of the images that are there of, Africa or any colonized nation for that matter. So even to, now read that all-male canon coming from, this particular country, and then to get one kind of image is also problematic. And that is exactly why we need to read female authors who are presenting the voices and picture of people who have been marginalized, and doubly so, by colonialism and also by native patriarchy. And that is how you get a more inclusive literary canon, or a literary picture, a literary landscape, for that matter, of any country, of any, region for that matter. So reading authors like Amata Aidu, Bessie Head, Grace Odo is an attempt to imagine a more inclusive canon, a more inclusive picture of the literary landscape that one can build. And an exercise that begins, a reading process that begins as an exercise of decolonization would exactly look like this when we read authors like the ones that are prescribed in your particular unit. So when Catherine Frank, which is there on your screen, she asks a question, how can we rescue and reevaluate people like Aidu and Ogot from the parentheses and footnotes of male-oriented and male-authored African literary history? This is what precisely she is, aiming at, right? We need to read more and more authors like them. they have been relegated to, they have been subjected to being there on the margins. They would be referred to in the passing. And that is why reading them, discussing them critically, talking about them, dissecting the text is an exercise in exonerating them from these traps of parentheses and footnotes, as Frank is, pointing out. We'll talk about the story in a while, but before that, let's take a brief look at the life of the author, because the experiences of the author shape a lot they express in their literary oeuvre. So here it is. Bessie Head was born in Pietermaritzburg, South Africa. Her mother was a white upper-class woman and her father a black laborer. And this has, her parentage has defined the way she has experienced the country, in the way, she has tried to belong and has never belonged all her life. Under apartheid, which is a segregationist policy in, Africa, South Africa, a union of this kind was considered illegal in South Africa. Her mother was admitted to mental asylum, where she gave birth to Bessie Head. The child was given for adoption. This is just to find out, just to kind of point out the struggle that she has had right from her childhood. The child was given for adoption, but soon she was returned for her strange look, because she was neither white nor black, and also nor male, these are the parameters that are going to define her identity and her experiences for the rest of her life. So she felt rejected by the South African society for not being black enough. Changing her course from journalism, I'm leaving that part out where, she also felt rejected by the Black Consciousness movement and the African National Congress and all of that. Changing her course from journalism to becoming a full-time writer, she later found refuge in Sero, Botswana, a village in Botswana. The struggle for belonging did not end here, as she found it difficult in her initial time at Sero. And later on, she found some acceptability and she engaged with people, and then it became a canvas. The village, Sero, became a canvas for her works like When Rain Clouds Gather, Maru and the Collector of Treasures, the anthology that you have. The title story from this anthology that you have for this particular course. She wrote perceptively about its people, their lives, their sorrows, their traditions, and the entrapments of those traditions. That is more important. It was not just valorizing or, glorifying the traditions that one has, found acceptability in, but it's also critically looking at it. And when you're critically looking at it, a woman's perspective, how beautifully that comes across, this is very evident in the story. And we'll talk about that in a while. So, and the literary attention that was brought to her as an author was through Alice Walker's comment when she called her one of her favorite uncelebrated foreign writers whose work deserved more attention. Right? So this was about Bessie Head. Now we'll talk about the story a bit. If one reads the story, it has all the elements that a particular, story can be interpreted very easily on the feminist lines. If you go for the obvious themes, that's very much there. The inner life of an oppressed woman, Dikeledi Mokopi, the critical commentary on the patriarchal system, and that is kind of, presented to you in a very essay-like manner, because the entire style of the story is very, is in a very oral tradition manner. The aggressive brutish man who's there, Kersego, the woman who finds her own liberation, Dikeledi, and the question mark here is because of the irony that is present in the story itself. She fought for her liberation, she got her liberation, but it was in the imprisonment and the literal one that she found her liberation. Then another theme that, quite evidently is present across the text is when you see instances of female solidarity or sisterhood in the story. For example, there is Kibonye, whom she meets in the prison, and the way she tells about the incidents that has also happened to her, the same, murdering of her husband. She's done the same thing, and then how they connect and how they talk about their lives, and how it indicates towards the systemic violence, systemic oppression that has been there for one particular gender for a very, very long time. And the deed that these women have committed is just a result of it. And largely that is also why your sympathy as a reader goes on that side, even when the story begins in media res with the announcement of the punishment of a crime that the protagonist has committed. So if you look at these very apparent themes, it's very easy to kind of understand this particular text on these lines, on the feminist reading line of it. But the problem occurs when you read a statement that somehow, counters the author's intention or author's affiliation with the reading of the story, the easy reading of the story. And that is why there's a question mark here on feminist reading. So what does the author say? She says in this A Woman Alone autobiographical writings, this is by another work by Bessie Head, where you get sketches and other excerpts of writing where she has talked about herself. She says there that my femaleness was never a problem to me, not now, not in our age. I do not have to be a feminist. The world of intellect is impersonal and sexless, right? So you can see that there is a reluctance in her to be called as a feminist per se. Now, we need to analyze this. And for that analysis, I'll take help of this very perceptive essay, Interrogating Dichotomies, Restructuring Emancipation, in Bessie Head's Vision of Gender Issues by Helen Rosalind Shigali. So in this particular essay, Shigali unsettles the interpretation of Head's work that base them in the dichotomy of gender of a brute, aggressive male oppressor. In this particular short story, you can, talk about Gersegomo Mokopi, and a meek, submissive female victim, which in this short story can be either Kibonye or Dikeledi herself. Of course, Dikeledi is there, as a protagonist. And Shigali also reads The Collector of Treasures, among other works, among other short stories that are there in this particular anthology, where she tries to find an answer to the reservation that Head has had or has expressed for calling herself a feminist. So we'll look at the definition of feminism that, again, is quoted in this particular essay. And among other things, we can see that I'll take up this particular part where, it's quoted that during much of Head's writing career, feminism was constricted to the simplistic and essentially Euro-American definition. Which Euro-American definition of it, where it's always, talking about a white female, right? Euro-American definition, which tends to conflate all human conflicts into gender oppression, right? Whereas when you kind of look at the kind of world in which Head's stories are operating, it's not just gender oppression. There are other structures, and she has very vividly commented and brought those structures into light when specifically she comments. We'll talk about that in a while. When specifically she comments on colonialism, when she specifically talks about how colonialism has created different kinds of masculinities and men, of course. So she says that this view obfuscates when we particularly, talk about gender oppression, and when you're conflating everything into, that, what it does, what it obfuscates, it obfuscates other human conflicts, including, rightly pointed out, racial, class, ethnicity, which are equally discriminatory and definitely central to the emancipator struggles in southern regions of the world. The latter are major themes in African literature. the conflicts of race, of class, of ethnicity. It's very much there. The deeper you go into the texts that are written by authors from Africa, the better picture you get of the society that's there. That how, class and ethnicity, different identities that are because of those, small groups that are there residing in a particular village, how, their system functions, and how people are trapped within them. And then also finding their liberations, right? How it is rewarding and also punishing. So that kind of a picture completely, goes absent when you are, subscribing to the larger picture or the larger critical framework that is offered by the white feminism, around which you are trying to read this particular text, right? So when Bessie Head is basically, restraining herself from being called a feminist, that is the kind of feminism that is available to her. Not the other kinds of feminism that we talk about, namely the third world feminism, motherism, Stevanism. We'll talk about Stevanism in a while, right? Black feminism, Dalit feminism. We talk about lots of different kinds of feminism that are very much required because they cater to the people who are there and witnessing the problems not in the same way, not in the way that people of a particular class or caste or ethnicity will experience. So identities differ, and they differ also the experiences and the experiential knowledge that is produced after that. So that is why she has had, that kind of a reservation. So this kind of lopsided definition was there, and that is why, and they go on explaining, this explains why Head would question a purely woman-centered approach to literary art, despite her demonstrated critique of African variant of patriarchy, considering the lopsided definition. It is understandable that many of Head's compatriots also distanced themselves from an emancipatory ideology that did not reflect African reality. It's about reflecting the African reality where both men and women experience multiple forms of oppression. Right? We'll talk about these multiple forms of expression that is very much present through some examples of characters, of incidences within the short story in a while. Now, I was talking about Stevanism, which seems to be a better term to approach the kind of women-oriented texts or this particular text that we are talking about. Basically, it's an acronym for social transformation, including women in Africa. And this term was propounded by Ogundope Leslie, a Nigerian feminist poet. And she describes Stevanism as a term emanating from the need to move us away from defining feminism and feminisms in relation to Euro-America or elsewhere, and from declaiming loyalties or disloyalties. I felt that as concerned African women, she says that in an interview, we needed to focus on our areas of concern socially and geographically. I'm concerned with the critical transformations of a positive Africa, positive meaning, being positive with everything that maximizes the quality of life of Africans and their potentials too. From this particular observation, and this is an excerpt from the essay written by Yinka Owate, and she writes that, from the observation that feminism was Eurocentric in ancient times, the African feminists decided to propound versions of feminism that brought about the totality of the experiences of the African women, both in her continent and foreign continents. Western feminism is a term given by given to the feminism practiced by the Western women who claim to be feminist, but do not regard other races in their ideology. Western women seem not to consider the African experiences, knowing full well that African women go through series of oppression both in their homeland and in the Western world. As I mentioned a while ago, the patriarchy that is present at the local level and the larger colonial structure that's there. So Stevanism would be a better way if we are, talking about the feminism that is present in this particular text. And that is why the reservation, that is how one can explain the reservation that is there by the author. So, like we were talking about the multiple ways in which the text offers to present you with a picture of the multi-layered oppressive society that is there. And when we look at this particular excerpt where Bessie Head is talking about, directly commenting in fact on the colonial era and how it has affected, it has ravaged the lives of men there. And it's a very perceptive and very insightful understanding by a female author of different kinds of masculinities that is being present in the society at the time when she herself and other women like hers are being oppressed by one kind of masculinity. And that is a great thing to happen in a text like this, that you're getting a picture of that sort where there were enough hindrances that could have guided the author to write a very simple text about a brute man who is oppressing women and is a thorough villain. So she talks about that, why are we seeing the men that we are seeing around us? And she says here, and it's a direct commentary on colonial era, she writes that it's part of the short story, the colonial era and the period of migratory mining labor in South Africa was a further affliction on this man, the man who's present in the colonized world. It broke the hold of the ancestors, it broke the old traditional form of family life, the rules and the regulations, the structure in which they have lived for so long and have been acculturated into it, have been habituated in the way they have lived for so long. So it broke the hold of the ancestors, it broke the old traditional form of family life, and for long periods a man was separated from his wife and children. Why? Because he worked for a pittance in another land in order to raise the money to pay his British colonial poll tax. British colonialism scarcely enriched his life. Though he was earning money, he was able to feed his family, but there was so much that he was losing on the other end, and this is what she is pointing out. British colonialism scarcely enriched his life, and then he became the boy of the white man. Look at the way she is pointing out at the effeminate masculinities or effeminate way in which men have been relegated to, or men were relegated to, in a system where the colonial man was a bigger man and the colonized man was a smaller man, or a boy for that matter, who has not become a man yet, right? So that's why she has put it there in this particular term, the boy. So he then became the boy of the white man and a machine tool of the South African mines, right? Remember in Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon talks about that how he has been turned into an image. His individuality is lost, right? So you can hear those echoes here as well, where he talks about, where she is talking about how a man is becoming a tool, and a machine tool in the hands of the colonizers in the colonial era. And then African independence seemed merely one more affliction on the top of the affliction that had visited this man's life. Right? It never bettered anything for him. So if she has been able to look so critically on the kinds of masculinities, the kinds of male characters that are around her, and has not fallen into the easy trap of villainizing, antagonizing the man who's around her or the men who are around her, then it is the task of the reader to kind of, highlight those areas and pick on them to understand the text fully, that how she has thrown light on the oppressive society that is functioning not in a very dualistic, binary way as that particular essay is also pointing out. Another interesting example, and a very obvious one also, that is present in the text is through the juxtaposition of the character of Paul Thebolo, the neighbor and friend of Dikeledi, and Gersego Mokopi. The two kinds of men described by the head in the story. There are two kinds of men. She talks about that in a very long paragraph. And she says that there is a man who is a brute and is full of animal instinct, living to fulfill only his carnal desires, much like your Gersego. And another who is a poem of tenderness. Like we say in today's phrase, he's a man written by a woman, right? He's a man created by a woman. He's a man nurtured by a woman, right? So when you look at a character like Paul Thebolo, you come across a character who's a man written by a woman, who's a poem of tenderness. And what does this man do? He turns all his resources, both emotional and material, towards his family life and went on and on with his quiet rhythm like a river. Right? And if you kind of, combine the paragraph above and the excerpt that I also have highlighted here, you get a picture, a study, a very critical commentary on the kinds of masculinities that are coming to the fore within the structure of the story, which, by the way, is not underplaying at all the theme or the larger theme, as we talked about, of highlighting the oppression of the women, the larger oppressive patriarchal structure that's there. So this is how this story needs to be understood. And I hope when you take a look at the short story, these will be the points that you bear in your mind, and you'll try to critically look at the story from this perspective and do a justice to the reading that should be there for a story like this. So thank you for your patient listening, and good afternoon.